At the break of dawn in the Renaissance countryside, the life of a peasant began with the first light piercing through the thin walls of a modest dwelling. The ringing of a village bell or the crow of a rooster often marked this start, signaling that it was time to rise and prepare for the day's demanding labor. Peasants, who constituted the vast majority of the population, were deeply tied to the rhythm of nature and their agricultural duties. Their day was shaped by the seasons and the necessity of tending to the land to secure food and livelihood. Sunrise labor was integral to the peasants' existence. As soon as the light allowed, peasants set out to work the fields, often accompanied by family members, including children and elders, who contributed according to their capacity. Farming was the primary occupation, plowing, sowing seeds, weeding, or harvesting crops, depending on the time of year. The tools they used were simple but essential: wooden plows pulled by oxen, sickles for harvesting grain, and handheld hoes for tending the soil. Most peasants did not own their land outright. Rather, they worked as serfs or tenants under a feudal lord, obliged to give a portion of their produce as rent or taxes. This system, while limiting in terms of wealth accumulation, structured much of rural life. Seasonal work dictated the demands on peasants' time. Spring was a time of preparation and planting. The thawed land needed tilling, and seeds were scattered to give rise to the year's crops, wheat, barley, rye, and oats being typical staples. Summer required ongoing care: watering, tending, combating pests, and repairing fences or irrigation channels. Harvesting occurred in late summer and early autumn, a particularly intense period marked by long hours to gather the yield before the onset of colder weather. As winter approached, peasants prepared for the months when outdoor work would become impossible or severely limited. This meant securing stored grain, repairing tools, and occasionally engaging in supplementary tasks like spinning wool or making repairs to their homes. Despite the physically exhausting schedule, communal aspects were central to peasant life and provided moments of social relief. Communal dinners were a regular and important feature, where families within a village or hamlet gathered to share food. Meals were simple, typically consisting of bread, pottage, a thick soup or stew made from vegetables, grains, and occasionally meat if available, and ale or small beer. Meat was rare for most peasants and usually saved for festivals or special occasions. The act of sharing meals reinforced social bonds and allowed for the exchange of news, concerns, and collective decision-making regarding village matters. The communal nature of these meals echoed the broader social structure of rural life. Many tasks were performed collectively. For example, during harvest time, neighbors might join to help one another gather crops quickly. This labor exchange was not merely practical, but also social, forging a network of mutual assistance crucial to surviving the uncertainties of the agricultural year. Church festivals and religious holidays offered additional communal moments. On these days, peasants could leave behind work and partake in rituals and celebrations that punctuated the rural calendar, events that offered spiritual solace as well as social cohesion. Moments of rest for peasants were understandably rare and constrained by the ceaseless demands of subsistence living. The hours of daylight dictated work, and the shortening days of autumn and winter reduced available labor time. The Sabbath, or Sunday, was the principal day of rest, mandated by Christian teachings prevalent across Renaissance Europe. On this day, peasants attended Mass and refrained from labor. This pause was not only a religious observance but also a social reprieve, allowing time for reflection, relaxation, and community interaction. Outside of such mandated rest, fatigue was a constant companion, and the harshness of physical work coupled with limited nutrition meant that life expectancy was relatively low. Yet the knowledge and rhythms handed down over generations enabled peasants to maintain their lives despite hardship. Their diet, while basic, was adapted to their environment. Root vegetables, grains, and occasionally dairy products supplemented by whatever could be foraged or grown in small kitchen gardens. Cooking technologies were rudimentary, with open hearths providing the primary source of heat and cooking capacity. Clothing, too, reflected the peasant's position, made from coarse wool or linen, designed for durability rather than comfort or style, and often homemade or bartered within the local community. Seasonal garments were necessary, with layers and heavier fabrics worn in winter. Housing was simple, timber frames filled with wattle and daub, thatched roofs, and earthen floors. Such homes provided basic shelter, but little insulation against the elements. This modest environment emphasized survival and functionality over aesthetic or luxury. Understanding the daily life of a Renaissance peasant also requires recognizing their place within the larger economic system of the time. The Renaissance is often associated with artistic innovation, scientific discoveries, and the rise of powerful city-states. However, the rural majority remained largely untouched by these changes during much of the period. While urban centers began to flourish with merchants, artisans, and scholars, peasants continued their traditional roles. That said, gradual shifts occurred, such as improvements in agricultural techniques, the introduction of new crops from the Americas after the 15th century, and slowly evolving feudal obligations that began to subtly alter rural life by the late Renaissance. Moreover, the feudal hierarchy fundamentally shaped peasant labor. Landlords or local nobility held legal rights over the land and its inhabitants. Peasants owed labor services or monetary payments in exchange for protection and the right to cultivate plots. This relationship was often codified by custom and enforced through local authority, limiting peasant mobility and autonomy. In some regions, these structures began to erode as the Renaissance progressed, leading to increased tenancy agreements and wage labor, but such changes were gradual and uneven. Despite these constraints, peasants were not passive. They developed local customs, folk practices, and communal governance systems to manage disputes, organize joint tasks, and maintain social order. Villages often elected representatives or held councils that made decisions pertinent to the community's well-being. These practices indicate a level of agency within the prescribed social order. In summary, the daily life of a Renaissance peasant was shaped by an unyielding cycle of work governed by the natural world and social obligations. From the first light of dawn, peasants engaged in labor that relied heavily on the seasons and demanded endurance and skill. Communal meals and collective efforts marked the social fabric of peasant communities, providing necessary respite and connection amid demanding routines. While rest was scarce and brief, it was structured within religious and social frameworks, offering moments of pause in an otherwise relentless calendar of toil. Through these rhythms and relationships, peasants formed the backbone of Renaissance society, a world far removed from the courts and cities, often associated with the era's glamour and intellectual fervor.